Welcome to Cross Section, conversations at the intersection of faith, news and culture.
Well, hello and welcome to Cross Section. We are coming to you in a special edition on this. It is Black Friday, as in it's the day after Thanksgiving. It is a Black Friday because the assisted dying or suicide vote has passed its second reading. We're coming to you about 2 hours after the vote, so we're both still processing that. Alicia, it's just you and I today, and you have been down in and around Parliament Square and outside Parliament around this time, so maybe come to you first just in terms of how you're feeling just 2 hours after we've got the outcome of the vote.
Yeah, somewhat deflated and disappointed. I'd say seeing the vote now has made me a little bit despairing and sorrowful at the decision that has gone ahead. But as you mentioned, I was in and around Parliament Square, had the opportunity and a privilege to go down and to support Care Not Killing and Not Dead Yet UK, which is a disability campaigning organisation. Many of you would have probably seen through media outlets and kind of the BBC drama led by Liz Carr, talking about the issue of assisted dying internationally and bringing it into the context of the UK, having seen what is Kim Leadbeater's bill. And so it was great to be there. It was well attended. It was a great mix of medics, those from Christian organisations, those from non-faith backgrounds, young, old, across the socio-economic and demographic continuum, all there in solidarity outside Westminster to really advocate and to speak out about the harms about this legislation and the importance for it to not continue. So that was this morning's sentiment and having adjusting to the reality that Parliament have voted for this to proceed. It's somewhat of a kind of a winded moment at this time. So
Yeah, I was watching the speeches, and we're going to come to just kind of what unfolded in a moment. And but even as the vote came in, I really didn't know, and I actually did a TV interview thing pretty much straight afterwards. I wasn't there; I'm at home, and the guy said he was watching and assumed this vote was going to be either close or probably against. So it kind of made me feel better. A journalist telling me that too. That I thought this was going to be more on a knife edge. Ultimately, the votes were 330 to 275. But I just feel gutted. I feel I'm not sure that people understand the significance. I chatted to some people and they were like, "Oh, this will not go through. This was beaten before," or they're kind of a sense of slight either didn't care or assumed it wouldn't go through. And I'm not sure people understand the significance of what this means and the implications we'll talk about in a few minutes. So let's rewind. Well, more or less today, but I mean, it was, if we went back, it's 21 days or 24 days ago the bill was actually launched. 21 days, I think it was, or something. It was a very short time period we've had this bill. 53 pages. So it's run on a very tight timeline. It's a private member's bill, as we've said before, which means it doesn't have impact assessments. It doesn't have full scrutiny. It can come with this very limited window. And I would say, from my perspective, Dignity in Dying they were ready for this. They knew it was coming. We were all a little slower in responding, although, again, I think we did well in the small window that was there. And we found ourselves coming into this morning, I think most people thinking this was certainly close. It was a good, I think, conversation overall. And people were really engaged. There were some good speeches. But so we've had 5 hours of debate. What were your takeaways, or what were you observing during the debate?
Yeah, 5 hours or 4 and a bit hours of debate. A lot of emotion in the room. There's a link on our website, linked to the kind of what was the Email Your MP, where I signpost people to the debate. Highly emotional. I mean, the bill sponsor in Kim Leadbeater opens, as it's her bill, and kind of opens with her address, her sentiment, what she believes are achieving and caring for the most vulnerable whilst addressing issues of pain and those with terminal ill health having what she describes as dignity in death. But I think some of the standout speeches were by Danny Kruger, who's been a long time campaigner on this issue. He's the Conservative MP for East Wiltshire. I think he's rounding off comments saying that we, as in Parliament, is the safeguard for those who are reaching the end of their lives, that we are the ones that should be establishing law, but also policy and funding that supports end of life care to the max. And that had a level of engagement and understanding there. I think Florence Eshalomi, who's a Labour MP, took to the floor and she spoke passionately about the realities that the National Health Service post-pandemic has had a number of inquiries, a number of kind of reports kind of detailing the health inequalities and saying that there's limited stroke no engagement with the reality that people from ethnic minority backgrounds either do not have the right access to healthcare currently or even to end of life care, and that their inequality should be considered, and therefore this bill is not sufficient with that. Of course, the mother of the house, as she's known, Diana Abbott, who's done some media engagement in the lead up to today's vote and debate, spoke outwardly and quite short in saying she does not support this in any way, shape or form, that coercion has not been sufficiently addressed. And she spoke honestly about that. So there were a number of speeches, and I've only listed those MPs who were in opposition to the bill, who used their own stories, constituency engagement to talk about the harms of this bill. But equally, from those who were supporting it, they equally used constituency concerns of saying we want the right to choose. And so there was equally a level of confusion within the Commons chamber in what is the right approach as us as legislators to move forward in on this. But those three are definitely speeches that were a highlight for me.
And I think the numbers were like 150, 160 people wanted to speak. The speaker obviously called as many as he could. But in the end, this is a time-limited debate. They had their 4.5, 4:40, I don't know exactly. The whole thing was done and dusted in 5 hours. So the whole, they had a reasonably, I think, a good and engaged debate, a variety of speeches, as you've said. And then they went to the divisions. They had to vote on this. The wrecking amendment, as it was called, wasn't taken. Certainly my sense was this morning that seemed to be the movement that direction. There aren't amendments as such put to this bill. It's as it stands, it gets voted to go to the next stage. And ultimately, I mean, I'm not sure, I haven't even seen all the numbers. I've seen the headlines, 330, 275. We either have or will shortly get a breakdown, and you'll be able to see what your MP did. And there were guts of 100, 150 were undeclared at the start of the morning. And the numbers I was looking at. So there'll be a lot of people still trying to work out, and as best I can work out, about 45 MPs, is that right, didn't vote in the end. There are a number like Sinn Féin MPs who said they wouldn't be there. Maybe others either were there and abstained, or maybe others couldn't be there. So, I mean, but for maybe those who are watching, that, as my understanding, would be a very big turnout. And even though the number is 50 between them, this is still a close vote in parliamentary terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we probably will put in the show notes the result breakdown, because it is published, and I'm slowly making my way through them to see the breakdown of who voted, how they voted. I think the headlines is the overwhelming majority, 234 Labour MPs voted in favour of this compared to 147 that didn't. So it's very much moved in the direction of Labour backbench MPs, along with others, carrying it over the line to give it that majority. So yeah, there's further analysis that needs to happen moving forward.
Now, people will be reading about this. This has been a big story. It's obviously been in the papers for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Really, it's been a very dominant story. And with us, the implications of this, we've talked a little bit about it. It has now passed its second reading. It's a little bit of technical jargon, but fundamentally, this is an individual MP, a backbencher, has brought this. They have had support. This is not a standard private members bill, and those are often a few lines or a page or two at max. This has been fairly well drafted in one sense, as in it's had drafting support. We think it's very badly drafted, though. But it has now passed in principle, would be the way I might describe it, and it now goes to a committee. But it's not a standard committee, and I'm going to look to you for your expertise here. This is the bill's sponsor, so Kim Ledbetter essentially picks the committee. It's going to be a committee of people that she wants on this. I'm not saying it's all supporters necessarily, but it's a stacked committee, and then it has to bounce its way through the House of Lords and back to the House of Commons. So where are we? What are the implications of today's vote? Because it's not the end, but it is a massive step towards this being approved.
Yes, and I think that comment you talk about in principle was explored from the floor. I think David Davis was one of many MPs. He's a Conservative backbench MP who spoke and said that his personal opinion on any legislation to legalise assisted dying, suicide, has shifted as a result of this debate. However, at this stage, he said, I am voting in principle for this bill, with a vision and a caveat that there will be substantial amendments to come, particularly around coercion, particularly in terms of identifying that, the role of GPs, the sense of referring, and definitely the GP or the medical practitioner raising it. He said he had concerns about that. For me, that logic doesn't follow through, that he listed at least 4 concerns that he had, but was prepared to vote it through. So yes, Parliament has voted in principle to continue with this. The next stage is that it will move to public committee. Now, from the chamber, Kim Ledbetter spoke and said that she requests the Speaker's advice about whether they could call people to give evidence to that committee or to receive reports to that committee. But as you rightly say, it's a committee made up in consultation with the rules of Parliament, but it is Kim Ledbetter that gets to select which MPs do sit on that committee. She did say from the chamber that if it did proceed, that she would hopefully have a constructive engagement from those who have opposing views. How many of those individuals will be interesting to hear, but we expect that the committee will report back in some point of April next year, all being well and moving through kind of Parliament's timetable, where then it will be voted on again at report stage and third reading. So whilst it's not the end, I think Parliament has given a strong indication that they're wanting to see this bill reformed rather than it be thrown out. So it's somewhat of an uphill battle for those of us campaigning for it to not make statute books. So, yeah.
And I'm not sure if you know this, but is it your understanding? So is it likely that somebody like Danny Kruger, who I think is seen along with Rachel Maskell as probably the two kind of leaders of the opponents of the bill, are people like them likely to be on the committee, or somebody from the other camp, if you like?
Yes, someone from the other camp. How likely it is to be Danny Kruger or Rachel Maskell or Tim Farron or Diane Abbott, that's to be confirmed, and we should have a level of indication before the kind of December recess in terms of who makes up that public bill committee moving forward. So to be confirmed.
Yeah, and that'll give an indication as to how serious people are about the level of change. But I think even those supporting the bill acknowledge it needs help. It's probably not legal, to be blunt, in my opinion, in terms of equality legislation, human rights legislation, and the clarity around coercion. It would probably get struck down or kicked out fairly quickly. It also has to go to the Lords, and it bounces back and forward. I've read, and again, interested in your opinion, that we're talking sort of 18 months here for this, even if it makes it through. And I mean, Lila Moran, I think she's Liberal MMP, again, was in favour of the bill, as I understand it was. But she was saying you could vote yes at this stage and no at a later stage. I think that's technically true, but would seem a little strange. And as you're saying, this is what some MPs are. Our view was the time to vote no was now and send it away. And if you were ever going to come back with a proper government bill, because our view is that this is increasingly harder at every stage to make any kind of changes. So it goes to Lords, and again, changes could be made there, but it would be difficult for the Lords to overrule the Commons. But this isn't a manifesto commitment, so it's not impossible that they push it back too.
Agree that there is a level of engagement. I think there's a theory of how a private member's bill moves through the House Yes, it goes to report state, committee, report, third reading, House of Lords. House of Lords has a second reading of whatever iteration of the bill they receive, and then there's further deliberation, and then the potential of any amendments to go back to the Commons. But given the scale and the gravity of this issue, within 18 months, the current health secretary has a review of health and social care going on. There could be more information about the state of the NHS that becomes revealed, for which those who have voted this through but have concerns, come third reading, they might be alarmed and might feel that this bill is the wrong bill, the wrong time, and shouldn't go forward any further. So we have to see stage by stage in terms of what happens next, but definitely our engagement will be to encourage MPs to engage with the bill and to engage with the wider conversation of the implications to the health and social care sector.
Yeah, and then we're going to finish. This is a shorter episode. It's a little bit different today, and we're going to look at those wider implications, and then as we wrap up, because I think my sense is that some people are still going to be surprised. So I think some people are surprised it's passed. Some people will be surprised as the implications of it passing begin to filter down through, including some of our listeners, or maybe not our listeners, but those in the evangelical constituency that we work in. While there was better engagement on this than there has been on some other issues, people were writing to their MPs, people were engaging. I think many were a bit of a shrug of the shoulders and like, well, I'm probably not with it, but kind of maybe it didn't seem like the biggest issue. I personally I do think this is the biggest change in a 10, 15 year, probably more 20-year horizon. I'm not sure. Same-sex marriage, and then you go back to abortion. These are the kind of scales of social change. I trained in Canada for my theology. Quite a lot of friends who minister there. The shift of the Canadian legislation isn't just some abstract idea. When we talk about more than 4% of all deaths in Canada are under their assisted dying legislation, the shift that makes in the psyche is huge. And those who minister in that area tell me the stories. I mean, it is on the table as an idea in a way that's inconceivable to us. It literally puts suicide on the table in a different way for people approaching death. And it means that basically anybody who elderly has a sort of diagnosis has to at least have that conversation, even as to say a categoric no, because a medic, a friend, a health practitioner of some variety is going to at least raise that in conversation. And that shifts everything. And I just think we haven't fully comprehended it. So I want to hold two things in tension and come to you. I do want to hold the level of kind of just heaviness I certainly feel around this. That is not, and I want to go through some, for me, I want to hold balance as to why I'm still hopeful about a number of things around it. But I definitely feel a kind of darkness. I put out my social, it is Black Friday, we've said that. There's maybe a kind of element of irony and dark humor in that, but there's a reality to it too. I think this will be looked back as a dark day, but I want to hear from you about those kind of wider cultural, the spiritual, the social implications of this moment for us as a culture.
Absolutely. I think standing with demonstrators and those who are out in force this morning to kind of raise their voices against the bill, we were talking about how so much has changed since the last time this was debated in the Commons, at least in 2015, in terms of our conversation around choice. Has shifted the sense of the individual, their right to choose in every circumstance, and not balancing the cost that has at the other end. The state of the NHS and social care sector has gone through significant and substantial changes, for which I don't think both parliamentarians as legislators and MPs who are newly elected, and even the public, are fully aware of the impact that this piece of legislation, if passed in full, would have on that. But it's also the wider conversation, as you say, around social policy, around the idea of death at the end of life. It is substantial, it is significant. I think many of the conversations that have been held about end of life care, I think it's the first time that in a long time that we're talking about its deterioration. It's just such a shame that it's being discussed in this context alongside a bill to legislate and legalize assisted dying. So there are many ramifications to consider, and I think that in time, once the wounds and that sense of heaviness lifts, and the fight and the urgency to respond and engage and go again, that will be the case that we make across Parliament in terms of its impact on all things health and social care policies and inequalities that many face in that.
Yeah, we sometimes talk about the cultural stories that shape us in this moment. I was asked in an interview earlier, was this the kind of secularism reaching its conclusion? And in one sense, yes, science is all the answers. When we don't have a purpose anymore, we can just end our lives and choose a kind of scientific way to end things. In one sense, it's the end of the individualistic story. It's that sense that we are individuals, everything centers around me, it's what's best for me, and I don't really care about the consequences of anybody else and the consequences on anybody else. This is often very educated and able people saying, I want this choice for me. And the fact that might put loads of pressure and coercion and implicit kind of pressure on people, they just don't seem to care about the consequences of their personal decision that actually has a societal ramification. And we talk at the end about the postmodern kind of story, the deconstructing of everything. We've deconstructed marriage and family and gender, and now we're deconstructing life itself, it feels like, at the beginning and end of life. And so those stories come together, and we talk about it in terms of a chaotic moment that we live in. And it just seemed, even in this vote, are people even voting for the bill that's in front of them, or are they voting for the principle of it? We heard good arguments from many, but also a very chaotic kind of picture about, as MPs argued this through, as different campaign groups lobbied. And we find ourselves in this moment. And so on the one hand, as I said earlier, I feel a real heaviness about the decision that's been made. And I feel the kind of, there is a darkness over it. There's a spiritual element to this. I, like you, am in a number of groups, fasting into this, praying into this, and seeing the commentary as this went, praying that people would be disturbed in their dreams and in their, and literally have nightmares around this, that politicians and MPs would be provoked in that way. But I also think the way this has centered the conversation has been fascinating. We have had a cultural conversation about the value and the meaning of life. While I don't like the outcome, there have been some fascinating conversations off the back of it. To see Dame Tanny Gray and others speak about disability, to hear people tell very personal stories, from Gordon Brown at the beginning of life to others talking about their elderly parents. And each of us have begun to process life and the margins of life and life at the hinge. And what it means for us as Christians to follow a God who did conquer death, but also knew the pain and suffering around that and living life at the hinge. Many passages have been shared. Psalm 62 was shared in a group I was in. My soul waits in silence for God, only for him, for in him is my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold, and I shall not be shaken. And so as we see a shaking going on around us in various places, I also think this is one of the most fascinating moments to be kingdom people. As Hebrews reminded, we have a kingdom that is not shaken. And so as other things are moving about and people are struggling, I think, to process some of this, I am hopeful in the midst of the darkness and the pain that good conversations can still be had in this moment, that we can have these missional moments of conversations about something so profound as to the value and dignity of a human life. And so I hope in the next 18 months that in many ways this isn't the end of the conversation, that those will continue. And while we'll be lobbying and campaigning about the technicalities of the bill and trying to push as hard as we can to either see it not properly pass and become law, or to be amended as best it can be, I think there's a wider set of conversations for us as Christians to be engaged in this moment. And so on a Friday, a Black Friday, a Dark Friday, while I am definitely struggling to process the vote, I also want to hold on to the hope that is found in Jesus, not in a trite and kind of way of, oh, well, Jesus is the answer, but actually in a very deep and profound and meaningful way to call out with the psalmist, when my soul waits in the silence and the blackness of this Friday, and see where my hope and salvation is found. With that, we're going to leave you today, and we will be back with Cross Section, probably a more normal episode, probably rejoined by Danny. But we didn't feel we had any choice but to respond very live and in a very raw way to what the bill that was passed today. And we'll keep you updated on the progress. We will continue to campaign. We will continue to talk to the church about the importance of engaging in this cultural moment. But for today, be blessed.